maybe could talk a little bit about your musical background and getting into your time with the AACM and how you became associated with them.
Well, I always wanted to play music, and I suppose my early exposure um, was to Count Ozzy and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari. I used to go to the camp and watch them do drumming. I think the first instrument, besides maybe trumpet, that I thought I wanted to play was the drum. It was so magnetic and powerful, especially the masterful approach and acumen of Count Ozzy and the mystic revelation of Rastafari that I began making instruments from tin cans because we didn't have a drum. But we'd mimic what they were doing using um, these large containers that, sorry about that, that crackers came in and powdered milk and so forth. Um, I I didn't get any formal training in music until I left um, and came. Migrated to Chicago during the '60s and '63, and to be exact, June of 1963. And in '67, I purchased the alto saxophone, started teaching myself how to play, and then hooked up with the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. Initially, going to concerts and being inspired by them and wanting to play. But actually, I wanted to play the trumpet. And while I was attending high school, I would go several times to try to get into band, but the instruments were always given away or allocated. And I never even thought about at that time looking for one at a pawn shop or renting one. In any event, in '67, I bought an alto. It was actually Joseph Jarman's um, old booster alto saxophone. He had acquired a new Selmer saxophone, and he had some, as another gentleman was selling the instrument for him. And I didn't have sufficient money to purchase it, but he just knocked off whatever I couldn't pay, and I paid him $90 for that horn. I wish I had kept the receipt as a historical kind of thing. Anyway, that fall I bought that instrument around July, and by October, the AACM opened its formal school of music, and began attending then. And so, that's a pretty well documented aspect of my trajectory into music. And I began at the school. We began studying, along with instrument technique, um, theory, and composition were endemic to this to the idea of you becoming a musician. Um, Composition was being a composer was crucial.
How did you was the AACM I guess how did you hear about the AACM as someone who was self-trained? Was it through Jarman or was it through just the neighborhood you were in? Or it's hard to get a sense of how well known that organization was at the time.
Well, um, serendipitously, the the organization was known in the area I lived in because they concertized in that area. Many of the musicians lived in that area. Muhal at that time lived just a few blocks from where I lived. Jarman lived in Hyde Park. So did Roscoe. Um, and I went to school with Joel Brandon, who was really a brilliant flautist, and we attended high school together. And he invite he's I had gone to AACM concert before, but he reminded me of and entreated me to come to some other concerts. And by going to those concerts, I then met Joseph. This is prior to purchasing the saxophone, and I started attending the concerts. I was really ready for that in terms of the experimentations that were taking place. I was looking for something like that, and so it was, almost every Sunday they put on performances at what was then the Abraham Lincoln Center. It was I forgot the name of the architect that built this place, but it's a well-known architect especially in terms of Chicago architecture. And so this building is an old building, and there were lots of artistic things going on in that building. There were other people besides AACM teaching music and dance and things like that. There were several floors. Um, so I went, you know, frequently, and not only to that site, to the Abraham Lincoln Center, which is now Northeastern University. But I went to the Adenoi's Hall. Um, I went to the Music Box. There were lots of different venues where different members did concerts. Phil Coran, who was one of the founders of AACM, also had branched out of the AACM and was putting on performances as well. So I was I was attending those, and then there were other venues that where you could see different musicians. Um, in fact, right around the corner from the where I was living at the time with my folks, there was a place called the Palace, and Howlin' Wolf used to play in there every Friday night. So there was the blues. I lived near 63rd Street and Cottage Grove, and so there was uh, it was an oasis for cultural events. You had Budland, you had McKee's Lounge, you had the Trianon Ballroom, you had the Tivoli. These are theaters where live music was played. And then not far from my house, although I was at 63rd Street, on my way to school, I would pass the Regal Theater, where just about every performer that you could name um, performed there. And so I was in the thick of things culturally, in addition to muralists and photographers, and many black bookstores were beginning to open. So it was, um, yeah, like I say, a cultural oasis is where I landed, fortunately for me.
At what point did you begin playing double reeds and flutes during this time?
Well, not long after acquiring my saxophone, I, I wanted to play the flute, and I wanted to play clarinet. I had listened to Eric Dolphy and was completely caught in the whirlwind, in the vortex. I was wrapped up. He's still one of my musical gods. That will be forever, because he just he really covered all the instruments so well, and could play in any context. So he impacted me greatly. So I acquired a flute pretty, not long after getting, I think before 67 was over, I had a flute and a B flat clarinet. And, a lot of the players from that era of playing, I'm going to make sure the alarm it doesn't go off again. Um, a lot of the players from that era, they played clarinet. It was almost, well, it was indispensable. In fact, a lot of players, they came up having being compelled to play clarinet first. And if you weren't playing clarinet, you were advised to play clarinet because of, as you know, if you've played the instrument, it's a lot more complicated in terms of fingerings and the nature of it. It's a more um, it's a more temperamental person. Yeah, squeaking and squawking is endemic to the instrument, But the sound is just so beautiful, and when there aren't a lot of recordings of Eric playing B flat, but the ones where he's like warm canto and some of the other ones, you just see his and then Russell Poco and a lot of the people that played with Duke Ellington, and of course Sidney Bechet, and a lot of I love the classical approach to the instrument as well. It's just the Chalumet register is just incredible instrument, and of course when you hear the bass clarinet or the I also have a great love affair with the alto clarinet, which is even more rarely played on, unfortunately. But it's a testy it's a testy instrument to play because the resistance is very different from the bass clarinet or the B flat clarinet, and they're awkward to grasp as some of the older models can be. I don't know if you've played that, but I was drawn to about the organization and the concerts that were being provided is the dance, poetry, films, the set design, those kinds of things. Concert, particularly some of the players like Jarman, who was, and he had some fantastic poets that read with him, like Amos Moore, uh, Jeffrey. I can't think of his name. His name will come to me. God, Rita Wofford, Amina Claudia Myers. So yeah, it was, Leroy Jenkins, great drummer, and then of course Malachi Favors, who was very uh, and the playing of what is called little instruments, bell.
Tell me about some of the workshops that you do. You do instrument builder workshops?
I do instrument making workshops. In fact, that was a big part of what I did in Chicago. Before I taught at the School of the Art Institute, I worked for an organization called Urban Gateways. And Urban Gateways was formulated to have practicing artists going to the schools to teach um, art. And Jessie Woods was one of I think she was the actual founder along with some other people, but I remember meeting her early when I started working as an artist in resident for Urban Gateways. And what was good about that was, as an artist, you develop your own curriculum and um, with advice from people that were versed in what how a curriculum should be balanced and so on. And um, and then you'd be assigned to a school for maybe 10 weeks or so, sometimes 16 weeks, and we'd make simple instruments instruments out of percussion. I mean, percussion instruments or wind instruments, didgeridoos, flutes, and then you would teach them songs. We develop compositions and so on. So that's how you know, that kind of teaching was really a great way to develop as a teacher, um, and to use your ingenuity and to try to figure things out. Because when you're going into a school, you would prep some of the work so that when you, because you don't have certain tools at the school, and it was a great way as an artist to make a living where um, you're not burnt out from being at a school all day. I think we worked maybe 3 4 hours in a day, so you could work three days a week or 4 days a week, and you had enough money to survive. You could pay your rent and so forth. So it was a really great thing, working for Urban Gateways, and I was also, um, at some point, you begin to do some teaching at the AACM School of Music, and so all of those things help prepare you, uh, as an artist. It also improves your ability, because when you have to explain things to other people, you have to learn a lot of ways to do that. It just can't. If you're a good teacher, you can't just learn one way to the to where you're trying to go. You have to learn, a lot of paths to the destination, so to speak. Um, what I've done in more recent years to kind of show you how, um, the confluence of teaching and how expansive an idea can become, something that seems quite simple. Um, most intricate things are really layered. There are a number of simple things that stack on each other, just as in language, where you learn your sound, you learn your letters, you learn your phonics, and then you begin to make words, to make sentences, phrases, paragraphs, and so on. Similarly, in terms of developing, um, ideas and concepts, one really interesting one that I've been involved in over the past several years is using tops to both utilize in terms of as a fun item, as an item that can, autonomously function as a visual piece, and then to deal with it from the physics of a top, um, and then using the tops to build compositions. So I'll explain in a little more detail for you. Um, I make tops from a number of items, from CDs, LPs, spools, bamboo, couch legs, any found object that I think. Uh, Here's one. A lot of my tops are upstairs, but here's one that's made from. It's made from a wheel. Yeah. Oh, there it is. And it's pretty. This is a pretty nice, hefty one. Um, but we make these tops, and then the students would decorate them. Of course, when you're building tops, that you have to deal with balance. You have to deal with the kind of material that you're using, what kind of floor. Lots of problem solving is involved, although it seems like such a simple device. And then they're the little ones that you can make that fits in the palm of your hand, like made from a spool. And then there are the larger ones that I'm making from things that are old globes. And I found these armed forces disc that are 16 inches. They're, a long playing is 33, 12-inch. So these are 16 inches, and they're often made of aluminum or coated. They're aluminum coated with vinyl. So I've been making these tops with the students. They decorate them, and there are different ways to launch them. Some you can spin with your hand, and some have string, so you can get more torque, and therefore a longer duration of spinning occurs. And what I realized was its social impact. When people play with tops, you have to get down on the floor and so you're more eye to eye. And then when you're involving a family and you're dealing with children, to as adults or as grown ups, we usually stand up and we speak to children that's lower than us. So a lot of times you're not eye to eye, but tops bring you in a social exchange, in an eye to eye, and a more visceral connection. Um, and what I found out about the tops, because when you're first playing with them, these things aren't necessarily coming to your mind until you start looking back at what has occurred, how has the interaction happened, what's occurring during the interaction. And the kids were so involved in it. Um, what brought me to making tops uh, um, several years ago now, um, to reconnect me with tops, was we have a gate that was, it almost wants you to swing on it. And so these kids swung on the gate and tore it down, and their parents were really upset with them. And, they came to apologize. And I said, well, I wanted to swing on the gate. The only reason I hadn't was because I knew it couldn't bear my weight. And so after that encounter, I thought, hey, the kids just need more interesting things to do. So we made some instruments together for um, National Night Out, and we did some tops at another interval. And they were so into it, and then the parents came along and saw the tops, and I had to take the tops away from them and give it back to the kids. So it jolted this thing in me that said, "Wow, this could be an interesting piece, composition." And so I did a composition that um, involved spinning tops. I made over 300 spinning tops at the time. Dancers, musicians, poets on roller skate, and one walking, and then people doing double dutch, and about 3 videographers videoing the stuff and shooting it back on the walls and the ceiling, and it was, such a engaging project. And of course, then both the audience and the players, it was hard to know, everybody was involved because the audience were the people that were spinning tops. They learned how to spin, and then what that does is it makes people want to show the other person their particular finesse and their technique, because everybody, like how we play, each of us are saxophone players, but each one of us will have a little bit different approach, or you'll have exercises that you swear by. And somebody else has another one, and they're like, yeah, you got to listen to this, or I play my forts this way, and somebody else said, it's like this is this chromatic thing. Anyway, Um, After doing that piece a few times and taking tops with me and just spinning them, doing a performance, um, I thought, this could be extended to involve physics, and I was particularly interested in this because children don't often talk about wanting to be a physicist or a botanist or anthropologist, archaeologist. It- and I call them boogeyman subjects because people will sometimes almost frighten young people away from the subject the way they respond when a child says, "Oh, I want to, be a physicist." "Oh, really?" As though they don't have the capacity for it. So I thought, wow, I'd love to. And I think one of the reasons that occurs is also because not many children get to actually meet a physicist or a botanist, but we get to meet poets and musicians, and we meet doctors and lawyers and so on. Those are fields that you often meet somebody, even as a child, somebody. So it doesn't seem so far fetched. So a few years ago, um, Carol Sarine, who I've been working with for over 30 years here in the Twin Cities, she has a project called Art Start, Art Scrap, and Art Start. In the summertime, she has programs where people come in and they teach puppetry and ceramics and painting and so on. And so she was fascinated by this TOPS project and applied for a grant. And I went to 3 different schools to do the TOPS project. And I said, well, wow, what would be really good is if I could get a creative thinking physicist to come along with me. And I developed a vocabulary, and then I had of that's dealing with torque, momentum, velocity, friction, inertia, all those um, physical conducts that a top displays. And so I was able to build the tops and then have the physicists come in. And as we play with the tops, you can then describe what's taking place. And all of them make sound, but some of them are designed to make particular kind of flute-like sounds because they're cut in such a way that they're hollow, and then as they spin and they get to a certain speed, you can hear the buzzing like a flute would, or like a cuckoo bird or something of that nature. So then, as we explored the the tops and their conduct, then James Doyle, the physicist that came with me, we would then embark on describing how you make an equation. And then, outside of the physics aspects, we we then looked at a, a chance possibility of developing composition. And I'll explain to you how that's done. So you have a tops, you put a chart on the ground. The chart has the 7 letters of the musical alphabet, and then let's say we have numbers from 1 to 16, from unison to the interval of a 16, and um, and then you spin the top, and let's say the top stops on a G. Okay, so now you have G, and as you know, you could have G G G the note. You could say it's a G triad. We could then well, let me go back and spin again. So you spin, and let's say it stops on a seventh. And you say, well, okay, now we have a G. It could be a G scale, or it could be a G triad, or it could be a G seventh, could be a G major seventh, G minor seventh, G diminished, augmented, dominant. So you have all those possibilities from just two spins of the tops and where they land. So you could develop a whole composition based on define things and then the chance element of things. And but you could write a very long and intricate composition based on these two uh, or these several factors. So you see the layering aspect of play and 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 the fact that playing, because we often don't think of playing as serious business, but it is. And so um, so one that's one aspect of looking at making something that's playful, that can be visually compelling and so on. And it has the crafting aspect, learning how to balance things, learning how to fabricate, learning how to see something that and repurpose that item or to make something specific to be a top. Um, and then the different techniques of spinning where you can use your fingers, you can use your palm, or you can use a string where you get a lot more torque. And of course torque has to do with spinning. So all of those things, so you're developing a vocabulary, you're getting a greater understanding of the behavior of a device that you play with, and the intricacies. And then on top of that, now you can then branch out from the tops behavior to planetary behavior. So you can be looking, you can transform from looking at tops to astronomy. And that's kind of, that's not kind of, that's how I think about things. And that's what I really want to impart to to my students, is that something that seems quite simple, even pedestrian possibly, has phenomenal possibilities, extraordinary possibilities, and it's really about your imagination. Uh, as two musicians, you can you can think about this, for example, how if we went to a scene and there were drums and there were claves and there were more enticing looking items, it's probably unlikely that we're going to say we want to play the clave. It's like, oh, two pieces of stick. I don't. I want that drum. And then somebody explains to you that really the clave is you might want to really learn this because this is in a sense the conductor of a Latin ensemble or orchestra. And so the simple nature of the instrument doesn't dictate its complexity. It's what is how you do what you do with it. I saw a man in fact in Havana, and he was playing a bucket, and I was mesmerized for about 40 minutes. I just stood there with my mouth gaping because he was not only getting all kinds of sounds out of it, but he was a uh, master percussionist. Of course, similarly, when we think about an instrument, we have levels and degrees of crafting and so on. But there are people that you consider a student instruments and what they're getting out of it is just, you're like, wow, it's a, whatever the generic name that the maker might be to you as compared to some other maker, and somebody is doing it. I think one of the people that you can look at in that way is Russan Roland Kirk, that often his instruments weren't the most expensive ones, but when he put it to his mouth, it was like, it was the Stradivarius of in terms of what was coming out of it. So those kinds of thinking, those kinds of thoughts, those that reality is what I think it's really about. And then, of course, working with children or young people or older people, and getting the satisfaction when they in turn pick up and they learn and they teach and they bring new ideas to you, or where you're astounded as what has occurred. I have some students who I've taught how to make in flutes, and they've carried on that tradition. I'm a self-taught flute maker, and later I went and studied um, shakuhachi making in Japan, but that was maybe 20 years after I'd been making flutes. But again, those experiences increased my knowledge of bamboo and of crafting things.
I'm wondering how your approach to improvisation and the philosophy surrounding it has changed and developed over time.
I don't know nothing. I, I think, just applying it, you realize it's a life conduct. That improvisation is not relegated or solely dealing with music, although we tend to ascribe it only to people making music. We think of improvisation. In fact, when we think of it, people say, "Oh, he's an improviser," or they have other names for it, extemporaneous, and so on. Um, but you realize in life, you are constantly improvising. I think even with the act of getting up, we sleep, we probably sleep in the same bed, but if we were to document how we get up, it wouldn't be the same way every morning. We might even sit up on the edge of the bed, but it would be a different spot, and chances are, the speed at which we get up, the enthusiasm, and so on, all of those things are different, and so they're forms of improvisation. One great improvisation that we do, uh, and I think about that a lot, is crossing the street. And I've used that analogy a lot because um, you know how we cross. We cross recklessly sometimes. When we know we shouldn't. There's something about humans that there might not be that many cars coming, but you can't wait. It's like, I'm going now. And you dash out, and of course, we've made it across. Or you give that look to the driver like, if you come any closer, I might jump on top of this hood and come through that windshield on you too. And then, there's you go halfway, and so we're always negotiating. And also, we know, even when we have the green light, we know that some people, the way they're coming towards the crosswalk, we we wait. We even block other people and say, this person is driving like they're not going to stop. So all of those things are going on, and I think um, those I think of improvisation as a very thoughtful kind of thing, besides the spontaneity of it and the immediacy of it, especially as people that are, well, we improvise, as I just mentioned, in life. And if you cook, if you you're making you're making some food, you don't have a particular kind of dish or pot that your mom has at home or whomever cooks at home, and now you might have to cook it in a condensed can, because you're out camping or your economic circumstance doesn't allow you to buy a very expensive pot. You might have to, so that the food doesn't get burnt. You might have to put some metal things so that it's up a little bit away from the immediate fire. It's thinking, you're improvising, you're using what's available to you so that you can attain your goal. Um, so improvisation is is thinking. It's one of the things that I wanted to mention was, um, as you grow. I lost my thought for a moment, but it will come back to me. Um, Improvising. I'll just move on, and maybe that particular idea will come back to me. But yes, if you're going to be an improviser, whether it's claves, and I go back to the clave because there are different ways to hold a clave and to get different sound from it depending on how you hold it. So one of the traditional ways is you hold it, it's in your hand, and when you cup your hand around it so that when you strike it, it this area acts as a resonator. Or you can hold it this way, and it gives a completely different sound from. I might have a pair here close by hand so that I can demonstrate what I'm talking to you about. And of course, I got 1,000 of them. I can't find one. Oh yeah. So you can hold them, or you can hold it like so. This is a so even a simple pair of sticks, just the way it will resonate, the way you grasp it, and which one you use to strike the other, different sound. And some of them, the sound will even. So even though it looks simple, as you explore it, there are all kinds of. So there are even different techniques of playing the sticks. Some of the techniques, some people might not use that method to play the clave, but as you explore what seems like just two simple pieces of sticks, which I turned on a lathe, these two, um, you get a whole nother um, texture and all sorts of possibilities. But to be a good improviser using an instrument as saxophone players, um, you you have to learn the instrument. You have to learn some things about the instruments. or you should. I've met people that, oh, I don't want to do that. I just want to play. In fact, I had a couple of students that came to me, and they didn't want to learn scales. They didn't want to do this. They didn't want to do that. So I said, well, okay, we'll do it your way. And after some weeks of them sounding the same way, I said, look, you might try to avoid this, but people have been doing this for a long time. Adolf Sax invented this instrument like 1846 or something. There have been thousands, there have been millions of people that have played the saxophone, and people have codified some things about it. I'm not saying you have to just stay rigid to that, but we also know that if you don't know how to put on the reed on the mouthpiece properly, if you don't understand where to put the ligature, all just those simple aspects, where how the neck is turned, because the mechanism works a certain way. If you turn the neck too much, the octave key won't function. So you can't get away from learning the mechanics of the instrument. And there is something to learning scales. It's how to get around the most awkward and difficult parts of the instruments, and how to, as you know, connect the registers. So no matter what you want to do with the instrument, you have to learn some things about it.
So would you
And
say, oh, sorry to interrupt.
no,
I'm
no,
just
no,
gonna,
no, no, no.
uh,
Come.
so would you say your approach to improvising or musical improvisation, I should specify, has your approach to musical improvisation changed since your time at, first learning at the AACM school and starting to be self-taught until up to now? I assume it's changed, but I'm wondering how it's developed.
It's changed um, because you have gained some understanding about the instrument, about what your voice might be. What is your voice when people say that to you? Because at first as a young player, um, I think you have a different conception about things. I certainly did. And you might have a goal that you're trying to attain, and you reach, sometimes you reach these peaks. You reach somewhere, and I know that both of you have had this, where you just feel like, yeah, I got it. I'm feeling good, and you're playing, and then it just gets, it's like it's that goes away. And you're kind of drifting. You just kind of, I was drifting anyway. Or you just feel like, wow, it's okay. But you're not feeling the same, you're not having the same joy necessary, or the same feeling. There's a point at which you reach where you feel like, man, I'm really getting it now. I mean, and then it lasts for a while, and then you're just like, okay, you can't stay there. And so you have to do some new questing. You have to do some new looking at, some fixing up of some things. Sometimes it's actually going and listening to other people. As you know, going out and listening to other people can help stimulate a new um, trajectory for you, a new a new thought about the music, or how you're going to use your music. Because I work with dancers, I work with poets, I write myself poetry, I work with painters, I work with new technology. One of the things that I'm doing now is I'm playing with hydroponic microphones, because I like to put my didgeridoo in water, and that's a whole new thing. And I've always played around with electronics. People don't often know that about me, but I used to have flangers and ring modulators. And in fact, George Lewis and I went to Governor State University together, where we studied um, electronic music. Um, and so you have these different interests that help to sometime um, stimulate and buoy your your new interest, your new idea of composing, your new idea of including some kinds of sounds and possibilities into your work. Um, I think what my growth has been is to almost see there are no boundaries in what I'm looking at. As you can see, I'm talking about tops and music and it's improvisation. I have a piece called Crepuscule that I it was a commissioned work back in 1993. It's an old piece in that sense, but every time I do it, it's a new piece, and I'll explain to you why. It's a piece that incorporate. The first time I did it, it was a composition, and the idea was to have people playing on water and people playing on land, and it was about the acoustical conduct of sound. What happens when you play outside if it's not a cavernous thing. If let's say it's just kind of a flat terrain, one thing happens. But if you play on water, um, another kind of acoustical conduct occurs. So that was the idea of that piece. But during that piece, I had people playing on land and I had people playing from boats. And it wasn't just people were playing from a canoe, and then I had a sculling team, people doing sculling. In fact, I almost did it at the Schuylkill because I did it. I did the Crepuscule piece at Bartram's Garden. If you don't know Bartram's Garden, let me make sure. Okay, and so, but the piece here's the piece involves almost any art form you can think of. I've had poets, like I call the ensembles pods, and I use the pods because that's how we designate families and relationships in terms of whales. And I'm deep into whales. I have many books about them and have been following them since the 60s. So so we have these pods. And so I've had capoeira, aikido, karate, sculling, jump rope, you name it. People making dolls and um, explaining to people the pain that they feel, and they've done it using the speaking as though they're talking about the doll instead of themselves. And it was particularly about young women being molested. And you can imagine trying to talk about that when you're really young. But I found a person that was making dolls, and this is what she was doing. So what Crepuscule does is it incorporates or it brings in people that are already involved in different activities, but often don't have a platform for its outlet. And then in addition to that, like I might have you come in and do a saxophone class. Maybe a saxophone class for lots of people, but maybe a saxophone class just for for young girls because they need to see a lot of people don't know anything about Vi Red. So, maybe you'll come and do a thing about Vi Red and your who influenced you as a saxophonist and so on, because some people feel like women should just play the flute and the violin or something. So, so Crepuscule pulls all of these entities in. There are no boundaries. Everything that I see, I've had sculptures. I had, in fact, um, the Crepuscule um, in Philadelphia, one of the schools, because there's Bartram Elementary and Bartram High School and Bartram's um, housing scheme, and all of them were involved in Crepuscule in different ways. And we even had a gardening project based on doing Crepuscule there. And there was a part where um, there was a photographer brought in and a botanist brought in. So it's expandable if you're opening your mind. So anyway, you can bring in all of these different components. Here is it was that I started doing the piece, call it Wondrous Waters the first year, and by the next iteration of the piece which was the following year, I was calling it Crepuscule, and I called it Crepuscule because it was taking place at twilight in the evening. I was I was doing I was using and developing what I call crepuscular sticks, crepuscular instruments, instruments made from items that were in their twilight of original intent, twilight of original purpose. So you're transforming these things. And then, so each time you do crepuscule, you might add another dimension to it because something occurred. The ha ha moment comes to you, and you're like, oh, you could add this and you could add that. And so one of the other components that eventually got added was recognizing um, elders, taking time to find people in the community, and we had the kids made necklaces and other things to gift to the adult to the elders, or to people that sometimes are like a crossing guard leader, or somebody that's in the community, that often the nurse at the school that never gets any accolades for all the work they do. So that thing was happening. That happened. I started doing that. That didn't come at the initial launch of Crepuscule, but these things are being added each time something new has been added, new components added. So that's part of the improvisation for me, is adding, developing, seeing the tentacles, seeing the connective, seeing the sinew, seeing the connective tissues that exist for us, and that we don't have to be locked in. When you spoke about earlier, I remember being really satisfied just going and playing at a gig, and you play and you go away, and eventually that became like, okay, I've okay been there. I don't know how many times we've done concerts. You can't count all the gigs you've been on, and I'm a little younger than you are. So and then it's like, okay, now what? So you're gonna have to write some music, or maybe you're gonna learn how to write for strings, or that you're always challenging yourself, and you're trying to find new and creative ways of making your life as an artist and as a composer, musician, saxophone player. Maybe you decide, like, oh, I want to play the musette, or the piri, or some other wind instrument, to challenge yourself, and it might actually make you play better saxophone, because now you learn something else about where you put your mouth on the reed when you play the piri, or how far in it goes into your mouth, and blah 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 blah. So by exploring new vistas, opening opening other doors, trying different ways of composing, um, those things now open you up for making your life as a improviser, as an artist, and as a person more impactful to you and to those around you. And so I think that's how I look at improvisation, is adding these new ingredients to the pot. And I know that sometimes I veer off and and get off the asphalt and start driving in the grass, and you're like, where's this guy going?
That's great because
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you here at the end before we wrap up. Recently picked up a cassette tape of called Red Hill,
Oh my goodness.
Douglas Ewart and Inventions Clarinet Choir. And so
Yes.
I wanted to sort of ask about your compositional process, but I was particularly interested with your compositions on this tape because it's amazing. I absolutely love this tape, and the all the clarinet voices together really great. So I wanted to ask, when you write compositions, how do you think about constructing this, and how notated is it? Do you leave a lot of room open for improvisation within it? Are you compositionally directing everybody, and maybe it's not written down? I mean, I'm just curious what that process is like for you.
Well, that whole record is composed, and I probably want to speak particularly to Red Hills because it's one of my most successful graphic um, compositions, graphically scored composition. But it's all scored, and but there are improvisational aspects that are connected to it. And I just did that piece actually in Scotland with a orchestra there, and I guess um, in fact I was talking to George about it because he was there when I did um, the first Red Hills. It's a place in Jamaica, and actually that we stayed in Red Hills because one of my relatives at the time owned a home there, and we went down to do a concert at the Jamaica School of Music, and we this was a new composition. In fact, it wasn't fully. I There was an outing of it. You know how you write something and then you start looking it over and you start tweaking different things. But it's still one of the most viable compositions because it has some strict forms, strict things that you have to adhere to, and yet those things have a lot of latitude. And the whole thing is a description of what there's a narrative of it in terms of Red Hills is a very steep terrain. You just keep climbing, and especially to get to my cousin's house, it's just corner after corner, and you just keep going up and up. And some of the parts where the street is very narrow, it describes people that are walking these hills because they don't have a car, and you can't really go over it on a bicycle. You People will ride to a certain level, and then you have to get off and walk. I mean, no matter how fit you are, it's just that too steep. And so it describes this. And in later years, actually, I wrote a poem, but I didn't write the poem first. The poem came many years and many iterations later. In fact, the recording that you have was done in '83, I think, or '82 at the New Music America. Um, that group played at the New Music America thing, and then we went to the studio and recorded that after that performance. But years later, the poem came, and now I'm doing the poem with the song. But it's what it is it gives you an overall a view of how to approach playing these scalar like things, these percussive like things, all with clarinets. I'm deeply into the clarinet, and one of the things that we had done during that period was kind of got away from the drum and bass idea, um, and being able to have certain kind of textures that are a lot more difficult to have when you have drums, and that kind of thing that it sometimes put you into. because people think that they have to play a certain way, and so you get away from that, and now you have a quartet of clarinets conducting themselves and functioning in a lot of ways, uh, in percussive ways, in textural ways, in scalar, in harmonic ways. And so Red Hills is one of those compositions. There's that recording of it, and then there's another recording of it with Malachi Favors, Roscoe Mitchell, Henry Threadgill, J.D. Perrin, Mwata Bolden, Edward Wilkerson, Anthony Braxton, and myself. And that's a completely different um, iteration of the piece. You can still, of course, know and recognize that it's there, but because it doesn't define the pitches. It gives you an approximation when you look at it. It tells you, because I also use lines and spaces, but it's graphically illustrated, and so like if I put a line in the area, let's say from D on in the treble clef at the bottom of the treble clef, and it goes up above it. You could play D, you could play D sharp, you could play D flat. So you have it's just giving you an approximation in terms of where on the instrument you're going to start that particular run. And then there are, you know, triangles that are, some of them are open triangles, some of them are closed to denote a more incisive kind of attack, and one that's open to to describe a more opaque kind of sound. So it has all of these possibilities, and each group that interprets the work does it differently. And then you can do it at, it was supposed to go really fast. Well, people sometimes play it slowly instead. It's supposed to be like, but some people say, so you can change the tempo, you can change the attacks, because your idea of opaque and mine might be two different one, or even mine today, my opaque today might be a little bit more gentle and so on than tomorrow or a few minutes from now. So it's all of these, it has a lot of flexibility in terms of how things are interpreted, yet it's still it's still there. It's like markers. I'll tell you, if you come into my house and there are no numbers on it, I might describe my neighbor next door to me on both sides, or I might say to you, because across the street is a more distinctive house, I would say, well, that house that has a lot of lanterns hanging from it, I'm right across the street from there. That might give you a better uh, marker for when you arrive at my house. So um, I don't know if that tells you. And then there are pieces that are completely notated in the more traditional sense that are on that. Ofo is one, the whale, the thing about whales. Because again, I was really into whales and the contrabass clarinets, the contra alto and contrabass clarinets. It makes me think about those subsonic frequencies that whales emit, and more slow and lumbering as these giants behave in water. And yeah, I
Are
don't know if that answers anything.
are those scores available anywhere? I mean, I'd be super interested in checking that out.
Yeah, at baseball games, there are scores there. No, yeah, they are, and I can look for them. At least I can readily send you the Red Hills one, because I know it's on the computer. The other ones are a bit older, and I haven't played them. Red Hills has become like the theme song for the AACM's Great Black Music Ensemble. They told me they just played it this weekend. They've played it countless times, and it's my most played piece, both by people and from people that play in different areas of music. I hate to use the word genre, so it slipped out. But
I would love to check
you know,
that out.
classical players have played Red Hills. You know, improvisers have played Red Hills. People that are very strict about things have played it. Improvisers have played it. And so I'm gonna send you the score and the poem. I'll send them to both of you so that you can look it over and um, yeah, it's gonna have to be the promise that you're gonna play it. So,
I would love to
because
play it.
I don't want to have to call Bruno. He's my brother. No, but yeah, you know, just really interesting, and we just did it, and we did it with the poem, and we did the poem became really powerful because we broke up. We had three singers in Scotland, and we broke up the poem so that they would do different parts, and then they would do things together, and it was just really interesting. So uh, to address both you and Noah's questions, you know, improvisation for me is life, and music is life for me, and I remember Noah asking a question, and I think mainly is as you grow as an artist, you get away from the idea that you know you're gonna be, I don't know, some you're gonna be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you just realize you know you hopefully you'll be one of the grains that that help to make the aggregate. You know, and you're glad if you can survive and thrive doing your music, and you also, I think, you grow in your appreciation of other people, and you're not trying to compare them to you know, you're not trying to compare other people to Eric Dolphy. Because as I told someone, as much as I love Eric, uh, and I love Vired, and I love Franz Liszt and so on, uh, you can't live on a one sound musical diet. And so my diet is pretty varied when and things will something attracts me, I'm going to it. I remember us walking down some, it was maybe it was Florence in the street, and a woman was, she was out there, she was obviously a trained opera singer, and she was singing, but she was also improvising, but it was just like you had to listen, and she had this voice that would just make the hair on back of your neck, just because she could hit those, she was powerful, and she was improvising. And so um I'll just want to tell them I'll call them right back. Yeah. So you know, you're more open, you're more embracing, you realize you can learn from other people. I'm going to leave you with this one. There, I was reading an article about Coltrane, and he was into playing so much that he would look for almost anybody to play with. And he went somewhere in Philadelphia where some young guys were playing, and it's like one of your gods come in and say, "Can I play?" And you know, and he came in. He was there were no airs. It wasn't like, you know, I'm the great so and so, because you know people like that too. And you know, he just played, and he was he was glad to play. He was encouraging. He came, he played, and then he packed up his instrument and he left just, in the most nonchalant kind of fashion. And his thing was always that you could learn something from everybody. And he also, in one of his interviews, he says that we all drink from the same reservoir. That we come with our ladles. I'm paraphrasing his and interpreting what he's saying, but it's like we all come with a ladle and we dip up some water, and it's a lot of different people in the water, a lot of different impacts, a lot of different influence, a lot of different chemicals in the water that we're all consuming, and we're influenced by those things. And then at the same time, you have to now make your own brew from that. And there's the heavyweight champion. I don't know if you've listened to that recording, but he has about 11 takes of giant steps on there. And if you listen to his instruction, he never goes into any long spiel about what people to do. In fact, one of them, he just says, "Can you do this?" Da da da. It was a particular part in the thing, da 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 da, and then he just stops and he's like, "Let's go." It's like no whole lot of, like how some people will go on for a half hour trying to tell you what you should be doing. He gives the most austere kind of guidance to you, and then he lets you alone. And they also said that often he said nothing. He just started playing, and you got to find it. It's just like and that's they seldom, if ever, that group didn't rehearse. That he just came and of course, you're picking people that are versed with their instruments, but they never knew what he was going to do, and they would just fall in. But we also know that we communicate telepathically. There's no doubt to me when we play that there are times when we hook up, and it's not just that there are times when sometimes we make a chord or something and everybody looks at each other like, "Damn, that was good." We also have those times when we look at each other like, "What the was that?" But those moments that you can feel, it's like, and when you're done for that night, everybody's like riding on cloud nine. But you also know those nights when we go in the back and people they don't say anything to each other. You just kind of looking at each other like, "I'd like to crown you," and they would like to crown you too. Yeah, but this has been beautiful, and I hope I said something.
It's
You
great to
said a
have you
lot of things.
so
Thank
much
you.
for chatting with us.
Yeah, yeah. This is a great project, and
You.
I'll meet you at the pass. Bye. You make any food? You gonna make something?